What's up, guys? I hope y'all are having a great day. As you saw from the title, I've looked at hundreds of games from my 1000 rated friend, and I pretty much collected a bunch of pretty instructive positions. So we're just going to look at some key takeaways and some areas that I think if you're around 1000 rating that you could use to improve your game. So let's get into the video. Alright guys, so here's the first position. I was actually watching him play this game live, and in this position he was thinking, okay, should I improve this knight or should I start pushing the pawn? What do you guys think the correct idea is here? In the game, he played b4 and immediately started pushing the pawn. Honestly, this move on its own isn't bad, but in general, the idea needs to be that you need to improve the pieces. There's no point in rushing here, and let's just see what happened. He started pushing the pawn, and as you can see later, he eventually keeps getting checked, and then he loses the knight, and now, according to the engine, it's completely equal. In this position, if he would have taken his time to first bring his knight to a better square, he could have avoided a lot of the complications. And in general, especially, at all ratings, but especially at 1000 rating, you're gonna blunder, you're gonna miss tactics, you're gonna lose pieces, and it's all good, it happens, but the most important thing is the understanding. The understanding needs to be that your pieces always need to be placed harmoniously. If you just have a knight just sitting on a2 the whole time, doing absolutely nothing, even though you're up a piece in this position, you might as well not be. Like, this knight isn't doing anything. So the most important thing is the improvement of the pieces and playing with the pieces in a harmonious fashion. Focusing on playing with the pieces is just a very simple way to play, but it still often gets overlooked because you get too tempted by like pushing this pawn, but that idea isn't going anywhere. So first, let's improve the pieces and then we can push the pawn, and that's just going to make our lives a whole lot easier. Alright, so in this position, my friend is playing black, and here he played knight to d4, and this move is not good because you're not protecting this pawn anymore, so now white can take it. And this is something that I noticed throughout a lot of his games that's very common, which is moving a knight away from the center when the time isn't right, and you end up blundering a pawn in the center. I used to do this a lot myself, and when you have your knight sitting on these squares, you really need to pay attention to what they're doing because this knight has a specific job of holding the pawn. And in general, moving your knights away from the center, you need to be very careful of that because that could potentially allow your opponent to bring his knight in a good square. This is an example from one of my games, and here I'm playing white against the FIDE master, and I played knight to d2, and this moves my knight away from the center and allows his knight to jump in to a nice square because my knight isn't controlling that square anymore. So you always need to ask yourself before you move a knight away from the center what squares that knight is controlling, and are you okay with giving up those squares temporarily. Moves like knight to d4 here can be good, especially if there's a bishop here pinning the queen, but before you make a move like this, you just always need to be careful that you're not giving up any pawns or any key squares, because this pawn, it's very important. It's essentially holding the center for you. So if you give away this pawn, you have no claim in the center. So it's not like you're just giving up a pawn, you're giving up control of the center, which is very important. Alright, so this third lesson probably isn't super important at 1000 rating, but it will become increasingly more important as you get better at the game. And that is just the idea of holes. So in this position, my friend is playing white, and his opponent plays c5. And this essentially creates a gigantic hole on d5. And essentially what a hole is a square in the opponent's position that cannot be protected by a pawn. So now, the reason this is a hole is because we will be able to stick our pieces on the square, and he won't be able to kick it out with a move like c6. From black's perspective, you might think this is good because you're attacking the queen, but the queen can simply move, and now we can stick our pieces on the square, and it's going to be very vulnerable, and eventually we can put a rook on this square, and once we move a piece off the square, we'll be attacking this pawn. So this pawn is forever going to be weak, and the square in front of it is going to be weak as well. This is actually pretty instructive too. So instead of just moving the queen immediately, a better move is to play bishop to b5 check, and then once he blocks with the bishop, you trade off the bishops, because if we didn't do that, the bishop could potentially defend this square in place of a pawn, right? So he could defend it with the pieces instead of the pawn, which isn't ideal, but it still protects the square. But here, if we trade off the bishop, now he doesn't have a light square bishop to defend here, so it's going to be even easier for us to stick our pieces on that square and not have them get traded off. This position is another good example of the ideas of holes in chess. So here, our knight just came out of this nice d4 square, and black plays e5, which immediately, as you can see, once you push the pawn, you make this one move threat, and previously this pawn was controlling these two key central squares. Now, he makes this one move threat, attacks our knight, and it seriously weakens this square and this square. So we can immediately just stick our knight on f5. We have good control of this square with like this pawn, the knight, and the bishop, and the queen, and we just have a good long-term pressure. So I think this concept, it's honestly a little more advanced than 1,000 rating. Like 1,000 rating, just don't bundle the pieces, but this is a good idea to keep in the back of your mind as you start to get better and better. It's really just the idea of making a one move threat with a pawn, but then you just weaken squares in its place. That's why I always just recommend moving the pieces before you focus on pushing the pawns. Like here, it's really important. Like we want to find a way to improve this bishop, or I mean, we could just play even a simple move like bringing the rook to a better square before we start focusing on pushing the pawns. Alright guys, well those are the most important lessons I've learned from analyzing hundreds of games for my 1,000 rated friend. If you guys enjoyed the video or you learned something, then please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.